Howdy, lieutenants and economists.
The most volatile, evil, disgusting things on the planet, humans. If you have a video request, you can always go to assholeconsulting.com.
Yeah, I am gonna charge you, kids. And that is the importance of not fucking up.
You are such an asshole!
Hey everybody, the old captain here. Go to Asshole Consulting. Yes, I do look like shit. I woke up and I haven't showered yet. That's why the hair does the thing that it does. But we have kind of an interesting thing, and I would advise anybody of any, who's an intellectual. I mean that literally, like a genuine intellectual, not an academician, somebody who wants to think. Look into the difference between our topic of conversation today, between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm going to read it. He wants to remain anonymous. Hello, sir. You have way too high respect for me. I enjoy watching your videos, and I think you offer very sound advice on various topics that interest me. Please compare and contrast the ideologies of two pivotal civil rights leaders, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Who would you side with? If you would side with one, who would it be? I would like a video response. I would like to remain anonymous. Best, and we shan't mention his name. So I did a lot of research, and actually it became more interesting because it is two different characters, and these two characters embody two different approaches to solving a particular problem. One is Martin Luther King Jr., the other is Malcolm X. And if you're like me, and you can't even say standard white guy, any typical kid that was fucking forced through the fucking public schools, you're like, oh yeah, Martin Luther King, fucking black guy, civil rights, blah, blah, blah. And then Malcolm X, like, the bad guy, not even that, but more extreme. You're like, oh, that's the weirdo. And maybe you associate him with Louis Farrakhan. You're like, oh, fuck that bullshit. But it really is just kind of like a sub-note in whatever educational history you got. But if, like I said, you are a genuine intellectual, it's very interesting to look these two people up and look at how they approached it. It being the problem of discrimination for black men. Now, I've taken notes because this was a much, it was a much larger topic than I normally get, and I'm like, I mean, seriously, I'm like, okay, Martin Luther King, yeah, the guy who did the march, and the thing with the stuff with the blacks, and that literally is the summation of all the education we got because we're so, I'm sure our teachers are trying to tell us something more, but we just want to go home and not deal with that. So when you look into these two individuals and the historical context they were in, it's a very interesting philosophical question the two present. And basically, what it boils down between the two characters, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, is to what means are we willing to go to achieve an end? And if you look on the internet, you watch the YouTubes and all this other stuff, it basically, and I hate to simplify the debate between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King because it's much more deep than that. But Martin Luther King was 100% pacifist, like we're going to do nonviolent resistance, and where Malcolm X was not for necessarily violent resistance, but he got to the point where he's kind of like saying, look, if this doesn't work, we have to at least resort to violence to get what we want. And so I think that's primarily where the debate between the two men have been historically, and what I think the client wants me to address. So let's go through a little bit of their background. Let me consult my notes. Okay, so there is some difference between the two guys, and I think their background did definitely affect, as you would expect it would, their beliefs and philosophies on how to approach eliminating racism, closing the gap between whites and blacks, and bigotry and all that. Martin Luther King Jr. came from a father who was a pastor and was rather well-to-do. And I'm simplifying this a lot, so please don't fucking in the notes. I'm just simplifying this for digestibility. But basically, Martin Luther King came from a relatively better background, more money, more income, more stability than Malcolm X. Martin Luther King Jr. came from, his dad was a prominent minister down in Atlanta. Martin Luther King Jr. then went on to go to college, things like that. Whereas Malcolm X did not have as nice of a upbringing as Martin Luther King Jr. And you can look this up, but Malcolm X, he lost both his parents. His dad died early in a streetcar accident. Some say that it was on purpose, like he was killed, assassinated by a Ku Klux Klan or racist or whatever. And his mother ended up going into an insane asylum when he was younger, and their house was burnt down, again, suspected, by white nationalists, white racists, Ku Klux Klan, whoever it may have been. Now, none of that's proven, and I don't want to also say, like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, yes, it was, but no, with the streetcar accident, as far as my reading has gone, it could have been an actual accident. But the house burning down, I'm a little bit more leaning towards, his dad was not a shrieking violet. His dad actually stood up for things, and so you could see, and I would not doubt any foul, that there was no foul play. There definitely probably was foul play. But anyway, we don't know. I'm just trying to be intellectually honest. So, Malcolm X loses his father, loses his mother. It most likely is at the hands of racist, not his mother, but he was definitely affected in his youth by genuine racism and bigotry by white people. Martin Luther King, not so much. I'm sure he experienced some kind of racism in the past, but not the potential murder of his father, nor the burning down of his house. So you can see where basically Malcolm X becomes a genuine racist. And he is. I'm sorry, that's my opinion of Malcolm X. He's a genuine racist. I was listening to several speeches of his, and he doesn't like white people. It's the white devil, white man did this, blah, blah, blah. And which you can understand, because that's, fuck, if white racists burned my house down, potentially killed my dad, and my mom went into an insane asylum, you could see where, you're kind of like, yeah, I'd probably be racist too. So in a certain capacity, I'm willing to forgive the guy, because it's hard not to hate people of a particular color, because people of a particular color did mean things to you. But it's also where this is where I would disagree with Malcolm X. It's like, dude, nothing's perfect, but there was a fucking civil war fought by predominantly white people that freed slaves. The United States is the only country that actually fought a war over it. Other people just washed it away or made slavery illegal. But in either case, you can understand why he would be a racist, a genuine one. But at the same time, it's like, did you not have the intellectual capacity to look at history? The guy really is like, there's no... you can listen to his speeches. He doesn't like white people. Now, interestingly enough, though, he is... And this is the difference with Malcolm X and I think, people... Malcolm X was for violence. He was not for violence. He was saying that should be an option on the table, if I interpret him correctly. And he was also for independence, basically, like black people should set up their own communities, their own economies, their own businesses, as was Martin Luther King. And so the guy had the right heart. I'm wondering if he didn't have a slightly better upbringing. He wasn't just so shat upon as a kid. Maybe his hatred for whites would not be there, or maybe he'd be slightly more open-minded. So those are the two backgrounds. I'm not painting this as Martin Luther King was this prissy little white boy from fucking Edina. And for those of you who don't know, Edina's like Minnesota's like fucking Winnetka for Chicago, or Upper East Side Manhattan. It certainly is not that. Both obviously, especially back in the 50s and 60s, had endured genuine racism. But if there's a guy who went through more fucking shit, it was Malcolm fucking X. So you would, with any kind of human compassion, you kind of like, yeah, I can understand why you might hate white people. I understand that. You tried to negotiate, say, hey, you really... But Malcolm X had the tougher upbringing. Martin Luther King Jr., and not necessarily born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he had more benefits. I'm not going to use the word privilege, but Martin Luther King had some leg ups in society over Malcolm X. All right. Okay, so let me revisit what our client wanted. I enjoy watching your videos, blah, blah, blah. Please compare and contrast the ideology of the two pivotal civil rights leaders. Who'd you say? Well, let's compare the ideologies, and we'll go from a base there. So we know the background of the men. Let's talk about the ideologies. Martin Luther King, both of them had the same aim, but they had different, or they had the same goal, but they had different aims. Martin Luther King Jr. was predominantly nonviolent, or he was nonviolent. He's like, we should just resist, we will overcome, and you saw that. And then Malcolm X, like I said before, wasn't necessarily pro-violence, but was like, we can resort to this if need to, so Black Panthers and Nation of Islam and all that other stuff. And if you watch other videos, I mean, history has kind of pivoted these two against each other, but if you look at both of them, I mean, they had the same goal, they had the same aims, they're on the same team. I wonder how much society has polarized these two versus how polarized they really were. No, and there certainly was disagreements. Malcolm X has a great speech where he's kind of ripping on Martin Luther King, saying, you know, like, you're leaving the black man defenseless against the evilest, most corrupt thing on the face of the planet, and that'd be, no, go away. Busy, no. Busy, I'm busy. So that was basically where, so Malcolm X was a bit more, what could we say, impatient. I hate to say, he was practical in one regard, but Martin Luther King was more practical in another regard. And I just think if we boil down the two philosophies between the two men, Martin Luther King had more patience, maybe had more tolerability, but I think in the long term his was more practical. But Malcolm X was much more ideological, philosophical, utopian, and I don't mean in a slandering sense. Utopian usually means impossible, which it was. But I mean, shit, I fucking like Malcolm X because he's a straight shooter. Martin Luther King understood the problems and the hurdles that black people faced back in the 50s and the 60s. And he was like, look, if we go violent, we're a minority, and we just came off Jim Crow, or Jim Crow was still even in existence, and there's been lynchings, and you know what? There's a shit ton more white people. They got a lot more guns. So Martin Luther King, I think, either by force or reality, he kind of knew, like, look, blacks just can't rise up and revolt because we'll get killed. And may I point out, that's kind of what happens. Not because of racism, because actually I side with the cops in most of these instances. But every time a young black man or woman, but typically, you know, Trayvon Martin, Jamar Clark, any one of these many instances that have happened in the past 5 years, what ends up happening? A black guy revolts and gets shot by the cops. So Martin Luther King understood, like, okay, you know, in the political sphere, I mean, even not back then, but today in the political sphere, you could certainly push over white people. Oh, God, no, we want that. But push comes to shove. There's cops with guns, and they're more heavily armed, and merely rioting won't really achieve anything except getting shot and maimed or potentially hurt, or at minimum, you're just going to destroy your own neighborhoods. So Martin Luther King, I think, was much more long-term thinker, much more practical. But it's a politician that does it. And I know. You could argue that his intelligence made him more practical, and he actually brought about a lot of great advances for black people within the United States. But then there's also the purist, the philosophical idealist of Malcolm X, where, like, yeah, that's the dude I'd be fucking siding with. And like, when I read through what they were saying, what a great... Now, you take the racism out for Malcolm X. I agree with Malcolm X more philosophically than I would with Martin Luther King. Malcolm X, I don't think, had any genuine hatred. Like, he would judge you, you know, based on knowing you. He was for black independence, for productivity, for success. But he just shot from the hip. In other words, Malcolm X would tell you to your face he doesn't like you because you're white. And I don't even think he would say that. I think because of his experiences, and he would probably judge each person individually. I don't know. I don't know the man. Unfortunately, the man died. But I believe Malcolm X to be more honest, more heartfelt, more shoot from the hip. Not that Martin Luther King wasn't honest or heartfelt. But he just spoke his mind. And that's why, like, okay, who are you going to go shoot AR-15s with? Who are you going to have a beer with? Who are you going to go fishing with? I'd rather go fishing with Malcolm X than I would Martin Luther King. Not that I would have a bad time with Martin Luther King Jr., but Malcolm X is, I'm sorry, he's more blunt, he's more direct, he's certainly politically incorrect. He's got the balls to say it at that time, in the face of what could be considered, genuine racism and institutional bigotry. That's the guy I want to, not only have a coffee with or a beer with or a scotch with, but that's the guy I want on my team, because we may completely disagree with each other, but he's honest. Kind of like a Bernie Sanders or a Donald Trump. We face somewhat of a similar thing today. Like, hey, Donald Trump is not the greatest guy ever. Somewhat of a charlatan. Bernie Sanders is a fucking socialist. But you know what? Those are the two only motherfuckers. You can't even say they're honest, but they're more honest than the pieces of shit that the standard establishment Republican and Democrats have been running. I mean, Hillary fucking Clinton, fucking Ted Cruz, they've fucking been in government their entire lives. So it's kind of those things where it's like, yeah, I disagree with Bernie Sanders on pretty much every philosophical level. I don't really agree with even 80% of what Donald Trump says, but at least they're speaking their mind. At least you know where those people stand. And Malcolm X was one of the, he didn't make any bones about it. You knew where Malcolm X stood. So it basically then, and this is the problem where it's like, okay, who is the more moral man, or who's the guy I side with? By moral integrity, I'd go with Malcolm X. Also, I forgot to mention, Martin Luther King Jr. was fucking on his wife, and he was plagiarized. He plagiarized to get his doctorate. Now, of course, I think the Boston School, or wherever he got his doctorate from, won't rescind it because of politics and affirmative action and bullshit like that. But Martin Luther King Jr. comes off more as a politician to me. Whereas Malcolm X, even though he probably hate my fucking guts because I'm white, is the guy, it's like, yeah, I want him covering my 6. That's the guy I trust more. That's the guy, disagree with him what you want, but since he's speaking truth, since he's speaking your mind, you're going to have more genuine and rapid and efficient progress with him in the idealistic world. The problem is the world's not idealistic, and that is where Martin Luther King was more practical in the long run. Martin Luther King was against a violent... what the hell? Martin Luther King, even though I'm not even disagreeing with him ideologically, Martin Luther King he's a lesser man, I would have to say, than Malcolm X. He's not a bad man. Don't think like, we're talking about two pretty good guys, although his image in my mind is definitely tarnished because of plagiarism and fucking other women when he's married. Okay, when you're not married, fine, but if you're married, Jesus fucking Christ, and you're a goddamn minister, well, for fuck's sake. Malcolm X, he'd face you front to front before he'd shoot you, and so that's where I like Malcolm X more as a person. But in terms of practicality, what has benefited the black community in the United States more, it would be Martin Luther King, because he was, unfortunately, the politician, and you had to know the lay of the land. Malcolm X was very idealistic, but not practical. Martin Luther King kind of knew the lay of the land. If we were to revolt, a ton of black people would have gotten shot. And he's like, wait, here's what we got to do. We're going to, change it by non-violent. We're going to protest. We're going to change the laws. It may take decades, but we're going to do it. And so if you want to look in terms of practicality, Martin Luther King was obviously not the better choice, he was more practical. He had more effect. But I mean, idealistically, you'd like to think that we could all advance. Like, for example, I could solve all the United States problems, most of them, by saying this. Women stop majoring in stupid shit. Everybody don't have kids outside of wedlock. Blacks quit blaming everything on whitey and stop having kids out of wedlock. Hispanics learn English, and everybody fucking major in STEM. That may be rude and crude and crass, and you could call it racist. You could hate my guts for it, but that is not racist. It's actually genuinely tough fatherly love, because if everybody followed that advice, we'd all have standards of living like Asians. Basically, everybody should aim to be like the fucking Asians in the United. And I'm not joking. Seriously, major in STEM. Don't get pregnant. Don't do stupid shit. Don't get in trouble with the law. This goes especially for Wyoming people. It's blunt truth, and that is more of a Malcolm X-esque approach. I think because of what he went through, the poverty, the lack of fathers, he ended up going to jail. I think that he didn't have the time in life to fuck around. He wanted to see progress before he died. Whereas Martin Luther King wasn't in quite a rush, didn't have such a harsh upbringing, maybe had more of a long-term delayed gratification approach, and he didn't have the vehemence or vengeance within his soul that maybe Malcolm X did. But that's why I like Malcolm X more. The guy is like, let's get shit done now. And in the ideal world, even though Malcolm X and Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, whatever, if we could be genuine adults, if we could be honest with ourselves, if we could set aside our pride and our ego and our affiliation with tribe, meaning, oh, I'm a white guy, you're a black guy, you're a Hispanic guy, you're female, you have veg, you have dick, you're gay, you're pan, what? We can set that all aside and converse like straight adults. The most successful and productive conversation would be to have conversations between the likes of me, of Blunt Direct Asshole at Asshole Consulting, and a individual like Malcolm X. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works. Most people get their emotions and their feelings in the way. Most people read People magazine, they watch Yahoo News, they believe the propaganda and the brainwashing they receive in school. Whitey's out to get you, blacks are fucking hate your guts, all this other shit. And once that static or gray or fog obfuscates things, we lose our sight of the main goal. We can no longer talk directly about it. And then you're called a racist or a bigot or a homophobe or whatever like that. But in the ideal world, a Malcolm X, even if he hated whites, I truly believe this, would be able to converse with, I'm trying to think of someone who's like a white nationalist. Like, for example, a Jack Donovan. I don't think these two, no matter what society would paint either of them as, both of them, I think, have the same goal of success, self-reliance, independence, freedom, and individuality. And if you were to get a Jack Donovan and a Malcolm X together, and they were allowed, like, these two were dictators, Malcolm X would control the black people, Jack Donovan would control the white people in this theory, they would have much more of an efficient conversation, come to agreements that would be efficient and productive for everybody much more rapidly, with no bullshit, no gray, no touchy-feely crap, that we would probably eliminate any kind of racial, sexual, bigoted, various isms problems that we have. Unfortunately, not everybody is Jack Donovan, and not everybody is Malcolm X. And people are emotional. People are illogical. The vast majority of people are lemmings. And so you have to have politicians of the caliber, and Martin Luther King was good caliber. I'm not talking lying politicians, but like a Martin Luther King, where that's reality. So in other words, pretty much anyone who would be listening to this video, the guy who requested it, I'm not going to mention your name, Malcolm X, Jack Donovan, we could be from all varied stripes and colors, and political indifferences, but at least I think we're on the right side of the Bell distribution curve when it comes to intelligence. I think we all get IQs of like 115 plus. And on top of it all, I also think we all have intellectual honesty. So that would make for a much more productive and efficient conversation. But dude, we're all rare. Dudettes, we're all rare. This is truly an academic and a philosophical video. It's sad because we all have the solution. I can't say we have the solution, but we have the key to finding the solution much more efficiently without spending trillions of dollars on welfare and social programs, not to mention laws that tweak and tell people how to live or want to manipulate people socially. If we were to be intellectually honest, more like a Malcolm X, we could solve a lot of problems by next year, by tomorrow, by today. But that is not the majority of people. The majority of people are emotional. They watch sports. They read People magazine. And at least for some of us, having this conversation may provide some solace and some understanding. Like, yeah, I understand, maybe blacks don't like whites for some pretty darn good reasons. Maybe whites don't like blacks for some other good reasons. But if you're going to judge a person by the character and quality, you meet them in person or you know them over the internet. We have intellectual discussions, and we all have intellectual honesty, I think, towards achieving a certain goal. And that is not just, I don't want to close the gap between blacks and whites. I want to close the gap between everybody else and Asians. I want to fucking be richer than motherfuck for all of us, because then I'd pay less in taxes and there'd be a lot more money. But I think at least this conversation will provide us a little bit of... there we go. Understanding, progress, and we won't solve the problems, but at least we'll understand it, And we won't hate. That's the other thing. You get rid of hate. It's just kind of like, yeah, I can understand. I see why they're doing that. No, they don't know what they're doing. They're dumber than fuck. I understand. I know. I disagree. I'm not going to change it, but at least there's some groups from this particular group of people that know better. We're all on the same page, and it's a genuine. What's the word I'm looking for? Not league, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. A brotherhood. A brotherhood. There's a genuine brotherhood of people, women as well, not just men, who actually give a shit about their fellow man regardless of race, religion, creed, blah, 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 vag. And we all try to aim for meritocracy, individualism, freedom, and success and excellence. And that we could keep aiming. That'd be the goal, is to have blunt, direct conversations like Malcolm X wanted to have. Hopefully not have to dick around with the inefficient process that Martin Luther King had to go through. But if we have to go through that route, because that's how the majority of people are, yeah. But at least we have some understanding on at least these intellectual and philosophical circles. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question there, Mr. Anonymous. And there's plenty more. This is just what I came up with reading and watching some videos and downloading some podcasts and reading. But I hope that answered it. Anyway, best of luck to all of you. Toodles.